Brit helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. During its 300 years, the city has faced conflicts with pirates and river rogues, but seldom have Vikings caused much trouble. Well, that may change this weekend as the Saints head north. Back home, the mayor-elect selects her team. There's opposition to spy cameras in bars and more security issues at Orleans Parish Prison. We'll also examine the crime numbers from the past year and what they say about the future. And we'll take a special look at the New York Times surprising ranking of New Orleans as a place to visit. On our map are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Kevin Litton, reporter, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune; Fletcher Mackel, sports anchor and reporter, WDSU-TV Channel 6; and Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. I'm going to go over to Mike first and take a look at crime and how we wrapped up 2017 in terms of our crime stats, and what maybe does it foretell about this coming year?
Well, if you look at 2017 compared to 2016, it was a very mixed picture. And there's good news and bad news depending on how you look at it. The good news was that murder was down about 10%. Finished about 157, 156, 157, depending on whose number you trust. Mm-hmm. So that's a positive, going down from 176 the year before. The bad news was that there were more shootings by about 2% over 2016. So what that tells you is that a higher percentage of people are getting shot but living. Mm-hmm. So the better news really is that the worst part of the crime picture was in the first 6 months of the year. So we were off to just a horrific start, especially the first 3 months of 2017. It looked like all kinds of records were going to be broken. A lot of questions raised about NOLA for Life and whether the murder reduction and violence reduction programs were taking root. But fortunately, during that period when everyone really braced themselves for the worst during the summer, those long, hot months of the summer, crime ebbed. And then the last 6 months of the year were a pleasant surprise. So looking at the trend as it is now, the past 3 months were pretty reasonable on shootings and killings. It portends pretty well for 2018, but of course cops, notoriously superstitious, they're not going to celebrate anything, they're not going to look at trends, they're just going to continue to grind each day, try to keep those numbers down.
What was done to drop those numbers in the last 6 months of 17?
Well, it started with a saturation over the summer, and it was a very concentrated strategy, actually bracing that things were going to continue to stay bad. And officers went to 12-hour shifts, 6-day weeks, and that had a noticeable effect. A few other things started taking root, and I guess one thing that was just horrific in the first part of 2017 was the murder clearance rate. There were, fewer than 20% of the homicides had been cleared going back 9 months, which meant a lot of killers were still either out there to kill again or to become targets themselves. Once there was a lull in the actual killings and shootings, it gave homicide detectives a chance to catch up. By the end of the year, they had they were at about 45% clearance rate, national average being about 56%. So they were closer to the national average. And that just meant, getting alleged killers off the streets, getting their sort of finger in the dike of some tit-for-tat disputes and feuds out on the street.
And NOLA for Life, is that having an impact? Could we look to NOLA for Life and say, maybe this is the reason why the rates went down?
Well, certainly it has had at least a limited impact. Now, The big question is whether there's been, the bang for the buck. It's, been $18 million spread out over the past 5.5 years, and it's a concentrated effort. It does cost a lot of money to have violence interrupters, basically go door to door of a neighborhood, and in this case, it started in Central City. And what, it's hard to determine is how much killing would have happened if you had not had these programs. Now, other spin-off programs include, the midnight basketball, job counseling services, call-ins where these targeted, offenders who've been through the system and were, targeted for either becoming the next victim or perpetrator are basically read the riot act. Like, we will offer you services to help you get back in school, get job training, but if not, we're going after you, and we will catch you, and we will arrest you and prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law.
And that continued through 2017?
Oh yeah, and it's, as vibrant, as it has been, it hasn't grown or expanded just because the dollars aren't there, but that continues to be a model, and in fact, New Orleans was recognized for that violence reduction strategy.
Well, let's talk now about our next mayor, and it would sort of segue over to Kevin right now, and she is starting to name some transition members or advisory committee members, and also transition staff. NOLA for Life is also something that she's going to have to consider whether or not to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things that's played out since she was elected is we're now at the 2-month mark since she was elected. And really this announcement about her transition advisory committee was the first indication that we've started to get about how she's actually going to transition from the campaign and into governance. But a lot of the people that are on this transition committee, I think were really put there to reflect the idea that the new mayor wants to have a diversity of viewpoints advising her. So you had some people that, there were some really kind of like, I think, big names on there. You had Norman Francis, Walter Isaacson, you had Gail Benson is on there, but they're in kind of a ceremonial role. The people that are really doing the work on that team represent a lot of business interests. There's somebody on there that's from civil engineering, so there's your kind of sewerage and water board person. You've got some people who are from politics, like Carolyn Fayard, who ran for the Senate, and you also have a couple of people on the crime side of it. I thought it was kind of interesting, the choice that she made here was that the two people that represent sort of the criminal justice side of things are both people that are advocates from the people that are actually getting arrested. There's somebody from Peacekeepers, Willie Muhammad, and you also have Norris Henderson, who's kind of well known as sort of incarceration and jail advocate. What you didn't have there is there's nobody that's really representing law enforcement on that team, and there's nobody that's really representing somebody from like criminal justice policy. I think we may start to see that play out more in the next week as they start naming some of the committees. If you remember when Mitch Landrieu did this, he had like 17 committees. One of them was criminal justice focused. He went right out of the gate for a task force to try to figure out what they were going to do about naming a new police chief. Now, I think LaToya's in a very similar spot in that there is not a lot of, she does not have a lot of people that are going to be patient to see some results there. I think they're going to want to see results on the crime, they're going to want to see response times come down, and they're going to want to know what she wants out of the next police chief. All of that we really have not seen yet, and that transition committee that she named didn't give us great indication of that.
And interesting that one of her early signals is that she wants to do a national search and replace the existing chief, Michael Harrison. Usually, at the very least, you give the incumbent an opportunity to stick with the job. He's actually, it seems like he's, just sort of getting his feet under him. Response time's edging down, crime numbers are edging down. So we'll have to see what the committees come up with as far as how much of a prospect he's going to be, or whether she's really going to go national and not look in-house.
Well, a national search isn't a new idea. I mean, Chief Pennington was part of a long-delayed national search. People were critical of Mark Morial. It took him so long that he seemed to have somebody. They said, let's go a little bit longer. Then also his dad, the police chief, I forget his name, he was from Birmingham. And so we've done it before, but it doesn't mean that sometimes it's better to have somebody that's in place. The problem is that it used to be that the people in place, there was so much politics within the within the police department, and there were so many factions that they needed somebody that could break that up. I don't know if that's the case now.
Well, and Michael Harrison has someone who we've seen grow on the job. So it's a little early in the tenure of a police chief, and he took over obviously from Ronald Surpass, to have a full report card on him.
Well, I think just real quickly to mention that Surface came out of a national search as well. I mean,
right.
He was an internal pick, but Mitch Landrieu has certainly gone with internal picks rather than the national search, even though they did a national search.
One more quick question to you, Kevin. The folks you named, that was for the advisory committees. That differs from the actual transition staff. Who are the
Right, and
staffers?
we have not seen a lot of who's on the transition staff either. I mean, they do have Michael Bagneris, who supported her in her run after he was not successful, and they've also named Michelle Thomas. She resigned from the Mitch Landrieu administration, and I mean, I got to tell you, I heard a lot of questions about that pick in this sort of vein of who is she surrounding herself with. There was controversy about a corrupt state senator, whether she had associated with him, and then Michelle Thomas is the next name. Now, Michelle Thomas, by all accounts, very successful, very smart, very able, but she resigned because of her association with her fiance, who was arrested on gun and drug charges. So, and I think LaToya Cantrell was very sensitive to the fact that people were raising questions about that and said, look, don't impugn this person's character. She deserves another shot. But I don't think that's what it was really about. I think it was really about, wait a second, if she had to resign under a new mayor, under an old mayor, are those same issues going to be brought up as a new mayor?
Okay, well, we're just beginning this process, so there'll be more to talk about. Thanks a lot, Kevin. All right. What's on everybody's mind really this week is the Saints. So, oh boy, they're facing a contest.
They are. I think this is the most intriguing matchup for the New Orleans Saints since the NFC Championship game following that amazing season after Hurricane Katrina. That year, the Saints went from worst to first. They had to go to Chicago. The Bears were considered a weaker number 1 seed, but the Saints still couldn't get past them. I think this is a tremendous matchup because most people don't look at the Minnesota Vikings as this juggernaut, so to say. In the AFC, you've got the Steelers and the Patriots. In the NFC, any of the 4 remaining teams, the Saints, the Falcons, the Eagles, or the Minnesota Vikings could truly end up in the Super Bowl. You could probably spend the next hour talking about why the Saints would win, why the Saints would lose, why the Vikings would win, why the Vikings would lose. And there is a convincing argument to be made for all of those things. I'm hoping the Saints win. I think this has been a tremendous turnaround season. Amazing young talent. Drew Brees still playing at a high level. The fan engagement is seemingly back after years of losing seasons where fans were kind of maybe moving past the Brees, Peyton era, saying it's the end of an era. But this is an intriguing matchup. Minnesota, I was up there in September for the season opener. Difficult place to play, and that's a really good team.
So it is a really, really good team, but we have a really good team too. It's a different team that played them in September.
It's true, without question. I always look back at that. A lot of coach speak is always, it's a different team, so much time has passed, don't look at that game. But really, it's not kind of just a bunch of cliched mumbo-jumbo. I mean, Adrian Peterson was the Saints starting running back in Week 1 and the leading rusher in that game. He was traded away in Week 4. Sam Bradford threw for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns for the Minnesota Vikings. He went down in Week 2, and his replacement, Case Keenum, is having an MVP-type season. He's 11-3 as a starter. He's thrown 22 touchdowns. So both teams are different. The one thing that concerns me is for all the optics that are different. The Saints have found themselves offensively. Ingram and Kamara have become this amazing dynamic duo in the backfield. The Saints' defense has really come along with all the picks they've invested on that side of the ball. The Minnesota defense was great then, and they're still great now, and it's going to be a loud place to play. And again, I think it's going to be a very close game, but I still think the Minnesota Vikings, I'm sorry for Saints fans watching right now. I hope the run continues. I would love to cover an NFC Championship game and another Super Bowl, and I hope I get that opportunity, but I still think Minnesota is being overlooked by a lot of people.
It seems like there's a tendency with these new stadiums, and this is a new stadium, to make the noise factor something that you build into the stadium. That you want a stadium where the locals are going to really, really be loud and unnerve the visiting team. Is that a fact? And how much difference does it make with that noise factor.
I think the good thing for the Saints. I'll say this: the Saints have the fewest number of false start penalties this season in the NFL. So noise wherever they've played, and they've played in loud venues. They played in Minnesota earlier this year. Buffalo's a loud venue. Atlanta was a loud venue when they were there. They've handled it well, but I think that is a huge factor, especially for a playoff game. Minnesota wants to do something that no franchise in NFL history has ever done: host a Super Bowl or play in a Super Bowl in their hometown, because the Super Bowl is next month in Minneapolis. So that's a huge factor, especially for Drew Brees, that that offensive line and that offense is based on rhythm. And if the crowd noise can throw them out of their rhythm, it is a big factor.
And remember, we're already 0-1 with Minneapolis this year, just in civics here, because this was the Super Bowl that New Orleans bid for.
I was there in Atlanta.
And it was the first time that New Orleans had ever been denied a bid, and it went to Minneapolis, so it seems like only right that the Saints should be in the game.
It seems like only right that the Saints should knock them out and get revenge on the NFL, awarding Minneapolis. I was in Atlanta covering that. New Orleans was 10 for 10 on bidding on Super Bowls and winning Super Bowls, winning Super Bowl bids. And everyone in Atlanta, all the national reporters, everyone that covers the entire league thought New Orleans is a shoo-in because they were tying it in with the Tricentennial. Their big pitch was 17-18, 2018, the kickoff of the Tricentennial. And Minneapolis had the new stadium. Everyone thought they'd give New Orleans this Super Bowl, and Minneapolis would get the one in 2019 or 2020. So it was a shocker when they didn't get that game. So yes, I think it would be nice revenge for the city of New Orleans if the Saints knocked them out and prevent that.
And this new stadium is an indoor stadium. It's
It
a
is an
permanently
indoor.
covered stadium. I mean, it's a lot of glass around it.
Correct. It's beautiful. It's a work of modern art, if you will, and it is one of their crown jewels of downtown. But thankfully, it is an enclosed stadium because the weather up there is pretty rough this week.
It's forecast to be about 14 degrees that day. That would be kind of chilly.
And you know what? That's the high.
Yeah, that's the high.
When I woke up this morning, it was 10 below in Minneapolis this morning because they had a huge snowstorm, and it's actually warming up, they told us, and it'll be about 15 degrees, which will be the warmest it's been in 3 days. So thankfully it's indoors. And I will say this again, the good thing for the Saints is that it's an indoor stadium, because while Drew Brees and the Saints hate people talking about this, they have not played well in outdoor stadiums, cold weather games. They've lost at Chicago. They've lost some tough games on the road. They did win in Philadelphia, but that was the only road playoff game the Saints have ever won in their history 4 years ago when they went to Philadelphia and won on a kick at the end of regulation. But the Saints have not historically been a great road playoff team, so thankfully this game is inside and not out in those brutal conditions.
Another thing going for us, we have the Sean Payton dance now.
Everybody loves it, Ryan.
Too.
Hit the Sean Payton, yeah. You know what? I just think that it shows that, and I think that's even in the rough years. Things go bad for organizations, and they lose control. And you heard about it in New York. That was a playoff team a year ago, and they quickly turned on their coach and said he's lost the team, he's lost the locker room, and they had a really bad season. Even when the Saints were bad, they were never really bad. They were 7-9 because Sean Payton never loses that locker room. Those guys love him and respect him and play hard for him. And I think, I don't want to say it's an X factor, but I think that is something that has helped them never fall to 4-12 or 3-13, and it is something that has helped them have sustained success this year. Is that they love him and he really cares about them.
Okay.
Doesn't that make it a little more of a picket game than maybe the odds makers are making it? There's an experience factor in Drew Brees
Without question.
Case Keenum.
Drew Brees is making his 12th postseason start. He's 39 years old. Case Keenum is making his first ever playoff start. But that being said, the Saints have kind of changed history for the good. There's nothing that says Minnesota can't rewrite their history and have this guy win his first ever playoff game.
Okay, but the Saints are going to go in there. They're going to do it.
I hope
Let's
so.
hope they do it.
I hope so.
That you continue covering the Saints.
That's
okay?
true. I'm
Cover
ready
the
for another
season.
NFC champion. I'm ready for this to keep going. Everybody's so excited. There's just a buzz in the city, and everybody's so happy. So I hope we get to
Best
continue
to them.
covering
Okay,
it.
it's going to jump over to E now. New York Times says, what, we were number one on the list?
Yeah,
of
the New
places
York
to
Times
visit?
has always had a fascination with New Orleans, sometimes in not a very positive way. But it's always like to cover New Orleans and to write about New Orleans. Well, its website did something this week about 52 places you should visit in 2018. And lo and behold, number one on the list was New Orleans. And this is like places around the world. And talked about New Orleans, its history. I mean, all the things that we always talk about New Orleans and its multiculturalism and its food and everything else. But I think the Tricentennial had a lot to do too, because it was keyed in 2018. Were it not for the Tricentennial, we probably wouldn't have been number one. But being anywhere on the list, on the list of the New York Times 52 worldwide, is just a great compliment for the city. And being a website, it has a lot of pictures on it and a lot of video, and the city looks beautiful. They have great shots of the second lines. It seems like such a happy place. Number two, though, on the list was the country of Colombia. So you say, well, Colombia is not a place that a lot of people have wanted to go in the past few years because they've had all those drug wars, but they say that war is pretty much over now, and they're really busy building a new tourism infrastructure, and they got scenes of there which are really beautiful. Of American cities, the places, and I think they're looking for like new adventures in places that you wouldn't think. So they don't have Manhattan, but number 8 they have in the top 10 is only 2 American cities. There's New Orleans, and number 8 is Cincinnati. In Cincinnati, they have because of a big art revival, and down the list a little bit, they have the city of Baltimore. But it just speaks well. I think it's very flattering for the city to be on that list, which just gets a lot of attention. And you see the coverage, and it's definitely a place that you want to visit. So if the Vikings lose Sunday and they want to get out of town, maybe they want they might want to look at it to come to New Orleans.
A good place to visit. Thanks, Ela. We're going to jump over to Kevin now. And certainly one thing that's important to New Orleans, restaurants and bars. And there's a proposal out there to put mandate cameras on restaurant bars, any place that sells liquor. Now, that's not moving forward at the moment.
Well, it was first mentioned a year ago in the mayor's safety plan, and you'll remember that came after that Bourbon Street shooting. And so there was a lot of pressure on at the time to really try to secure some of the most busiest venues around the city. And there was some controversial stuff that came out of that plan. I mean, they wanted the bars to close their doors, not close, just close their doors after 3 a.m., and everybody fought that. The cameras, I think, flew a little bit under the radar because there was a plan, and the plan is in place, to have about 350 cameras that the city owns that's out in public areas and public squares. But then they're going to add these additional cameras, which there's 1,500 licensed venues that can serve alcohol. Now, this goes far beyond the bars and the restaurants. I mean, grocery stores and pharmacies often have liquor licenses. Gas stations sometimes have liquor licenses. So all of these would be required to have outward-facing cameras. And the thing that I think has unnerved people a little bit is that the city wants to require them to not only install the cameras, many of them already have cameras, but also connect these cameras to the citywide network, which would feed into this real-time crime monitoring center, which is downtown above the French Quarter. And that's where they monitor the city-owned cameras. And then if there was a problem that came up in real time at a certain address, and they knew that they had a camera on a bar out there, then they'd be able to switch over to that camera and kind of see what's going on. Also, these cameras are going to have to upload to a cloud server, and that footage would have to be retained for 2 weeks. So if a crime is reported maybe after the fact and they need to go back, they can go get that. But, this has started to spur some real debate over kind of a big brother policy. And really, there are not any other cities that have a similar requirement. I mean, this is 1,500 venues, so that's potentially 1,500 cameras. That's maybe thousands of cameras if they're going to install multiple ones on each one. And if you think about it, a lot of these places, restaurants and bars, these are the places where New Orleanians love to go to relax and hang out and not have to think about some of those other things. So I think people are, as they are thinking about it more and more, are starting to feel kind of a creep factor here.
But this has been deferred. I mean, they were going to take it up, this week, but
it was supposed to go this week.
The administration asked that it be deferred.
They asked for it to be deferred because the Restaurant Association has had some concerns. I think a lot of the bars are really taking a close look at it. Even the arts and culture organizations have said that they're uncomfortable with it, so they want to take a little bit more time. But I do think you're going to see it come back in February, along with some things that are going to be going on with the strip clubs on Bourbon Street. I mean, the council's starting to run out of time to get some of these really big proposals through.
Before the next council comes in,
Right.
which is in May. Okay, Kevin, thanks a lot. And let's go over to Mike now. Just a quick update on our jail. We have a new building, but we still have some problems.
Right, it's now the Orleans Justice Center, but people still refer to the old name Orleans Parish Prison, OPP.
OPP.
And it remains under a consent decree because of long time dangerous conditions, both for guards, for inmates, for contraband. And there were some incidents in the later part of the year that once again highlighted that they have a long way to go. I broke 2 stories, one about a guard who was moonlighting as a shot girl at a daiquiri club in the French Quarter, and when there was a little dispute over how much a customer was supposed to pay, she pulls out her badge, threatens arrest, and that led to her being suspended and arrested for malfeasance. In another incident, even maybe a little more spectacular, a female guard at the jail left during her lunch hour long enough to go home, get in a fight with her husband, allegedly battering him, pepper spraying him with department pepper spray. By the time she got back to work at the jail, there were police ready to arrest her. And, you know, that is just sort of typical of the continuing head-scratching incidents that go on there. Now, there are far more serious incidents. For example, 4 inmates who passed out from drug overdoses.
While in the jail.
While in the jail. Two were in the bus transporting them to court, 2 later in the cell block who had also been on that bus. But it again shows that they are nowhere close to getting out from under this consent decree, getting out from under the compliance director, Gary Maynard, and
who's actually running the jail. We have the sheriff, but
day-to-day operations are being handled by the compliance director. So Marlon Gusman is still the sheriff in title, but he is not making personnel hiring decisions or strategic planning decisions.
Okay, so that's another issue that undoubtedly
continues
we'll be
on
talking about,
well into 2018.
And the remainder of the consent decree.
Yes.
The jail does. Okay, thanks a lot, Mike. All right, it is time now to look ahead. Boy, this has been a full hour, a half hour so far. It seems like an hour, but it's a half hour so far.
Beginning tomorrow, there's going to be an effort spearheaded by the Newcomb Art School in a studio in the woods to plant 300 fruit trees around New Orleans in public spaces. I mean, fruit trees that people can have access to. And so they'll start that tomorrow. And in the spring, they're going to develop actually a couple of fruit tree parks, one in the 9th Ward and one in Gentilly.
Wonderful. Kevin.
On Tuesday, LaToya Cantrell is going to be making her announcement on her transition plan. I think we're going to learn a lot more from the transition plan than we learned from this advisory team, especially the folks that are going to be on the committees and what direction she's headed with public safety.
Okay, thanks. All right, pleasure.
Okay.
What do you say?
I guess the Saints are heavenly, and I hope they end up in Super Bowl 52. I love the Pelicans as well, but unfortunately, Tom and Gail Benson's other team nosedive, one of the biggest letdowns in the NBA this season. I think Dell Demps and Alvin Gentry are on borrowed time. Sean Payton may get an extension after the success. I think the Pelicans are going to be making some big decisions, and it's not going to be good for the people across the parking lot on Airline Drive.
All right.
Well, a big criminal trial scheduled for next week, which should generate a lot of attention, not just locally, but nationally, and that's Ronald Gasser, accused of fatally shooting Joe McKnight, the star football player, in a road rage incident over on the West Bank in Jefferson Parish. So there's going to be a lot of eyes on that.
All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Great discussion. Thank you all for joining us. And, of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Go Saints. See you all next week. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.